Hello, everyone, and welcome back to American Spirits. Our regular co-host and leader of the stream, Charlemagne, is not here today. But nevertheless, I think that you and the audience will be very happy with today's live stream because we have quite the panel. I am joined by our regular guest, Mr. Auberon Quinn. How are you doing, sir?
Oh, delighted to be here. I am snowed in at the moment and ready to stream.
Very good. Sounds very cozy. Getting ready for the oncoming winter. A very American time of year. And we're also joined today by Mr. Stephen Carson. How are you doing, sir?
Very good. I actually got the first bits of that snow near where Jerry is and fled it just in time. Sounds like so. I'm safely away from the snow down south.
Very good. Um, so, if you didn't catch the stream last week, and you very much should have, Uh, we are beginning to cover a series of articles that are very important for the American right, intellectually and academically, that are on the topic of non-intervention. Sometimes it used to be a slur labeled as isolationist or whatnot else. I think most of us today would prefer the term anti-empire or anti-various special interest groups that we will get into with the reading today. And I would also like to tell everyone that this was planned much like last week's stream in advance. So this is particularly insightful on our part that we could predict where the main topic would be going. Today we're going to be covering Patrick Buchanan's "Whose War" article from the American Conservative that was published March 24th, 2003, specifically talking about, or we'll get into this, the War Party, as he calls it, influencing the American government to invade Iraq. Now, the panel before you today is going to be somewhat interesting, I think, for you in the audience, because this article predates me by a matter of mere months, whereas the other two members of the panel remember when it was released, or perhaps have read it soon after it was released.
Yes, I vividly remember reading this article back in 2003, and it was quite pivotal in my own ideological development. I had come up as a standard Republican, vaguely right-wing guy throughout my youth. Had a libertarian phase in college, as so many of us did. But this article hit me right between the nose back then, and it really began my own evolution to where I and we are at now.
Very good, Mr. Carson. Did you have any remarks, perhaps related to the time then?
Yeah. So I occasionally mention that I predicted 9/11, and I thought I'd share a little bit about how I did that and how that affected my perspective, so that I can bring you a little bit into what it was like for me coming up to 2003 and the invasion of Iraq and the resistance to it, which I was right in the middle of, so to speak, in a way. Um, uh, right. So, how did I predict 9/11? Well, the short answer is Justin Raimondo, but the long answer is that I was paying attention by that point to foreign policy, paying attention to what the U.S. was doing abroad. And I want to say right now, I often defend my fellow Americans from European attacks by, because they'll be like, how is it Americans don't know much? Many Americans don't know much about what's happening outside of America. I try to explain to them that America's really, really, really big. And it's pretty hard for us to keep track of what's happening in the United States itself, much less other places. Um, but by this time, I had developed an interest in affairs abroad from a broadly, anti-U.S. empire stance. And so the way I predicted 9/11 is pretty simple. I saw what the U.S. empire was doing, and I don't know how I did this, but I somehow used some kind of like empathy or something, and I thought how I would feel. Madeleine Albright was the one, I think, who said they asked her if it was worth it that 500,000 children had died in Iraq because of U.S. sanctions.
Yep, that
Trying
is
to
a Madeleine Albright banger. Yes.
That's a Madeleine Albright. That's right. Yeah, so that had happened by this time, a bit before this time, in fact, and a number of other things. The anger of Muslims, of U.S. troops being near their holy sites in Saudi Arabia, and of course, anger over what was being done to the Palestinians in Israel. So I knew about all those things, and I could just feel it. I could just feel that anger was rising. And I wouldn't have even remembered that I had actually predicted that something like this would happen, except that while it was happening, I was at the work cafeteria. We all went down to watch. And while, the second plane was hitting or whatever, a coworker walked by me, leaned down and said, "You said something like this would happen." I'm glad he said that, or I might not have remembered. So yeah, I saw it coming. And so the important thing about sharing that is that it really changed my perspective when it happened from a lot of people around me, including like people in my family and at church and stuff. They, not having paid attention to what the U.S. empire was doing abroad, found this quite surprising. I expected it. I knew why it was happening. They just saw it as a bolt out of the blue. This seems to very often happen to Americans. They saw it as a bolt out of the blue and were just like, what is this about, And then they turned to, the president and so forth, the people who opine about foreign policy to explain to them what this meant. And we very immediately got, the war on terror, and so forth, and a ready-made package, as Pat Buchanan's going to outline here. Go ahead.
It's interesting you go to 9/11 with this because we'll get there when Pat gets there, but maybe the causal nexus between the Iraq War and 9/11 is not quite as on the level as was represented at the time. But the other thing that strikes me is that you mentioned predicting 9/11 and that most Americans experienced 9/11 as a bolt out of the blue. I am in that latter category. When 9/11, 2 years before this article was written, happened, I was still in college. And as I said, I was a pretty normie Republican at the time. And this completely rocked my world. And it was only with this article and the articles written by Sam Francis and by Tacky and by other people at that time that I really began to understand that it wasn't a bolt out of the blue, why it had happened, and why the course that was being embarked upon would end up so disastrous.
Right, exactly. So I had a very different reaction, and you can see a public, though I didn't unfortunately publish my prediction of 9/11. I did publish in the month after 9/11 on LouRockwell.com, October 2001. You can find an article by me where I'm urging a different kind of response than I can already see as forming. One that would involve some humility and trying to understand, U.S. actions, and so forth. And they're very much what Ron Paul talked about in his presidential run, when he made some of those great statements about a different approach to foreign policy. So in October 2001, I was clearly coming from a different place than those people who were just completely surprised by 9/11 and didn't know what was going on, So anyway, there's my background as we come up to now coming out of 2001 and going towards 2003, where Pat Buchanan writes this article. You can see that I've got a very different mindset, right? And I'm reading this. I'm sure I read this article. I was a charter subscriber to the American Conservative. I would have been nodding the whole time reading this article and going, "Yep, knew about that."
Right, and this is important. I would like the anyone viewing this not to discard any of that background information from either of our two guests today. Because this will become very important. We're going to build off of that and perhaps talk about those things as it relates to us today. Mistakes that were perhaps made, or even people that bought into malicious actions who were aligned with the groups trying to get us into war in the Middle East. So the two panelists, I'm sure, will build on their experiences as we read the article, maybe things they see today, but you and the audience should would at least do well to remember them throughout the stream. Now, just to get the stream moving, because Pat Buchanan is thankfully very concise, very good of a writer. I will start from the first paragraph, just because the italicized text at the beginning is not important to to the point here. Buchanan starts, "The war party may have gotten its war, but it has also gotten something it did not bargain for. Its membership lists and associations have been exposed and its motives challenged. In a rare moment in U.S. journalism, Ken Russert put this question directly to Richard Pearl. Can you assure American viewers that we're in this situation against Saddam Hussein and his removal for American security interests? And what would be the link in terms of Israel? Suddenly, the Israeli connection is on the table, and the war party is not amused. Finding themselves in an unanticipated firefight, our neoconservative friends are doing what comes naturally, seeking student deferments from political combat by claiming the status of a persecuted minority group. People who claim to be writing the foreign policy of the world superpower, one would think, would be a little more manly in the schoolyard of politics. Not so. So this is already interesting to me, because this is Pat Buchanan writing in 2003 in a journal that was established just the year beforehand by anti-neoconservatives. And he jumped straight into this article on the Iraq War, talking about the Israel lobby. This is interesting to me, because in the modern day, if you were to do such a thing, you would have people who are not neoconservatives but moderates that are really afraid of the extremes, accusing you of perhaps being woke right or something similar. And I can't help but imagine that this is a very similar dynamic that was happening at the time. In fact, I know Buchanan got backlash for, like many other paleoconservatives, talking about the Israel lobby.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
No, please, you go first, Randall.
I just have to comment. First time tragedy, second time farce. This woke right thing, it is, like Ryan said, a repeat of what we experienced 20 years ago, but it's just so dumb and absurd. Like, is anyone persuaded by woke right? That wasn't basically, some kind of pro-Israel lobby person in the first place. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, you're right that it is very much a repetition, first as tragedy, then as farce. But it's also kind of the past as prologue, because in this time in 2003, this was a real shock to the neocon establishment, this connection of their interests with Israel's and the suggestion that perhaps they did not have the interest of the United States as their foremost concern. Prior to this, any discussion or portrayal of Israel in the media was invariably hagiographic. This is really the first time a jaundiced eye was ever cast on Israeli influence in American politics. And back then, they didn't have the immune system to it that has developed today. So in some ways, the backlash was worse then than it is now. And in other ways, as Stephen intimated, it's so much stupider now. But it is very much the same phenomenon.
Right, and this is also, I think, very formative to a lot of the right, as we talked about last week with with Dr. Tom Woods and our other OGC member Pete Canonez. There used to be an ardent anti-war strain, anti-intervention strain on the right. We talked about, I believe, Senator Taft last week. We talked about the National Review co-opting parts of the right to get it to become fervently interventionist, such that it basically created a libertarian movement by excising it from the wider American right at the time. And then here we have another group with a very similar history excised from the American right by roughly the same people once upon a time, who were also used to be branded as isolationist, keeping that old streak of non-interventionism alive. It's just that jumped forward to 2003 as opposed to last week when we were mostly in the 60s and 70s. They're very much a minority. This old belief that was very characteristic of perhaps what we might call heritage America. They've been reduced to a minority. They're not in control of policy whatsoever. And in fact, as I'm sure that you two can elucidate, being against the Iraq War was a very minority position. This was not a popular stance to take.
Oh, extremely. If you could only, if I could only reproduce the arguments I had with my father over the Iraq War, who was the most ardent Republican you could want. But yes, on the right, as opposed to the left, which we'll discuss as a separate issue later, I'm sure, but on the right, the war was the party line, and opposing it had you cast out of the mainstream right immediately. In fact, the American Conservative magazine was founded precisely in response to these circumstances. Pat Buchanan and his co-travelers, Joseph Brown, and so on, all founded this magazine for the express purpose of one, opposing the Iraq War, and two, reasserting non-interventionism into the American right-wing discourse.
Yeah, and just to be clear, the founders were Taki, Scott McConnell, and Pat Buchanan. Those were the three that started AMCOM.
Was Sabran dead by that point? He died a little after that, I think.
That might be right. I'm not sure.
Too soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, he would have died 2010.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Still too soon, but yeah.
Right. So this is I think important, especially for the younger members of the right today to understand. I think especially a lot of Zoomers listening in would have grown up during the popular backlash to this, when it started to become politically feasible to oppose this war, as opposed to just being a paleocon or a paleo-libertarian or some variant of new leftist, perhaps. Most of us, myself included, would have grown up when it was politically popular to hate Bush and whatever else. I think this has perhaps caused a backlash or a overcorrection where people on the right assume that we have to be pro-war because we grew up when everyone, including the left, hated Bush and the war. But something that we're seeing with last week's stream and this week is that that's not actually the case. You do not have to overcorrect. It's perhaps good to keep alive this American non-interventionist ideal.
Oh, the mention of the left reminds me of something that he doesn't address at all in this article, because he's on the attack here, as we can see right away, against the neocons, and it's really an intra-right conflict that he's addressing. But just in case you don't know, the left, some people on the left were opposing the war, though it was broadly supported, let me be clear, by Americans. But some people on the left were supporting the war against, were opposing the war against Iraq. And the big phrase, if I remember correctly, was "no war for oil." Am I misremembering? I think that's the right war.
That was the leftist rhetorical tack. Cheney worked for Halliburton. The Iraq War was purely to pump up the share price of the oil companies. That was the framing on the left.
Exactly. So I thought that's kind of interesting to have as background knowledge as we go through this article. That sort of economic materialist approach, which sometimes is the correct approach, but Buchanan doesn't take that at all in this article. So
right, and in fact, I'll continue because he's about to mention some things that might sound even more similar to what we deal with today. So Buchanan continues. Former Wall Street Journal editor Max Boot kicked off the campaign. When these Buchananites toss around neoconservative and cite names like Wolfowitz and Cohen, it sometimes sounds as if what they really mean is Jewish conservative. Yet Boot readily concedes that a passionate attachment to Israel is a key tenet of neoconservatism. He also claims that the national security strategy of President Bush sounds as if it could have come straight out of the pages of Commentary magazine, the Neocon Bible. For the uninitiated, Commentary, the Bible in which Boot seeks divine guidance, is the monthly of the American Jewish Committee. And because I know what the comments will be, I'll read the next couple of paragraphs because they're somewhat similar. David Brooks of the Weekly Standard wails that attacks based on the Israel tie have put him through personal hell. Now I get a steady stream of anti-Semitic screeds in my email, my voicemail, and in my mailbox. Anti-Semitism is alive and thriving. It's just that its epicenter is no longer on the Buchananite right, but on the peace movement left. Washington Post columnist Robert Kagan endures his own purgatory abroad. In London, one finds Britain's finest minds propounding, in sophisticated language and melodious Oxbridge accents, the conspiracy theories of Pat Buchanan concerning the neoconservative, read Jewish, hijacking of American foreign policy. And then I think this is the last one that I'll stop with. Lawrence Kaplan of the New Republic charges that our little magazine, quote, has transformed into a forum for those who contend that President Bush has become a client of Ariel Sharon and the neoconservative war party.
Yeah, so something that really struck me in this section, rereading this, bringing me back in time, but also, you know, as we've been saying, we're experiencing very similar things now, is the Mott and Bailey, the very manipulative and dishonest Mott and Bailey thing that happens, right? If you attack the neoconservatives, then they say, you know, you're attacking all Jews. But then, as Pat Buchanan points out, they also say, yeah, neoconservative interests are basically very tied to Israel, right?
Yeah.
So it's like it's the parallax. We've named it better since 20 years ago. It's the parallax effect, right? If they in a celebratory way talk about how the Bush administration at this time was in lockstep with the Israeli government, then that's fine. But if you say the same thing and you're critical about it, then you get smeared as an anti-Semite and so forth, right?
Yeah. And not only are we dealing with the same thing, but in these 4 paragraphs, I was struck with how we're dealing literally with the same people. And from that, I extrapolate that there's been remarkably little turnover in the neocon brain trust. They don't seem to be developing a lot of new talent in the last 20 years. The only one seriously comes to mind is Ben Shapiro, who hilariously got his start right in this era. This is the time period when he began his career shilling for the Iraq War, and it's funny how little has changed.
But he was like 12 or something at the time.
Yeah, he was. His whole shtick was he was the child prodigy. When he was on WorldNet
Right.
Daily, he was their youngest columnist ever, and that was his whole thing. He was the child prodigy shill.
Well, maybe just like everywhere else, the boomers won't let go, and they won't let younger people come into leadership. You know.
I mean, that would make sense because this is basically boomer-ish ideology personified. Now, I do find a different trend on display here as well. You'll notice that each one of these figures got exactly what they wanted in policy. It was being carried out with virtually no political pushback. And you read, if you just showed people what they were saying as a result of them getting what they wanted in policy, you would think that they were being persecuted. This is fascinating to me.
Are you saying they're crying out as they strike Iraq?
It seems to be a recurring behavior, but like if I just read these paragraphs out of context, I would have no clue that this was in response to the Iraq War launching. I would think this might be from perhaps the modern day.
In response to the zenith of their power and accomplishment, yes.
I did want to raise one point before we go further, and that is in this article, and certainly this wasn't a controversial term to use at the time, I don't think. He repeatedly uses the term neoconservative to refer to this group, and he's gonna give a little background on them later. I've seen people say it's silly to use the term neoconservative now. That really doesn't apply to anyone anymore. But as Auberon Quinn pointed out, we're literally dealing with the same people with the same agenda and the same reasons, pushing for the same sorts of things. why shouldn't we keep calling them neoconservatives? But I mean,
Well,
please correct me if I
no,
I'm
I'll
missing
tell you
something.
why we shouldn't continue to call them neoconservatives is because the mask is off. I mean, the conservative part of neoconservative was always a mask that Trotskyites wore, as we'll see in a minute, to
Right.
get themselves into the Republican coalition. But at this point, the mask is so threadbare and the premise so risible that that there isn't much reason to call them neoconservatives
Okay,
except
that's true.
as a
Some of them
vituperative epithet.
Some
So
of them
this is
went
a
to the Democratic Party in recent times, right? Like I
Yeah.
think Bill Kristol maybe. So
right.
yeah,
Yeah, they
Famously
he's
endorsed
not
Mondami the other day. Yeah.
yeah, he's not even trying to present himself as in
Yeah.
any sense on the right or a conservative or anything like that. So
Yes, they've
yeah,
dropped.
maybe that's the main reason to stop using the term.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
and this is also interesting as well because I once upon a time covered articles from the Neoconservative Reader edited by the Crystals, where they basically tried to describe what their own ideology is. And the things that they specifically advocate is an ambiguously restrained welfare state that may or may not continuously grow, which one side definitely believes in right now, and it's not the side calling themselves conservative still. And they also strongly believe in an intimate connection with Israel. You know, that's perhaps against other agendas within the GOP right now by certain other factions, perhaps a populist or American First faction. And they also believed once upon a time in what they called a semi-free market. But that very much appears to have just been a mask to have on. You look in the modern day, all the neoconservatives gather towards political parties that massively increase the welfare state, really, really like Israel, and don't mind whatever they regulate, nationalize, or whatnot else. So it's I think right now it's less a neoconservative problem because it's not as clear a defined group. But one of those issues is still the main dividing line. There are still people really trying to push this national security, or in some cases now they've upped their claims to like a civilizational integrity argument, specifically for the intervention. So I don't know that neoconservative is as useful anymore.
Yeah, and the emphasis on terrorism, which continues. You know, we're just fighting all of these people who are all terrorists, right? That's all we're asking.
Yeah.
You know, the terrorists in Gaza, etc. Right? That implicitly, Ryan, has the civilizational framing, right? Because the whole point of labeling someone a terrorist is to say that they are beyond civilized norms. They don't fight war like we civilized people do. You know, right?
I mean, I was more trying to point out like the another or perhaps a slightly younger generation of neoconservatives like is it Douglas Murray, self-proclaimed neoconservative, who is saying that like if Israel falls, the West falls, or something like this. This absurd hyperbolic claim. It seems like they are very much just single issue, and whatever other views that they need to take this group that we're talking about vary depending on which side they think can get them into power.
Well, the version of that from 2003 was we fight them over there so we don't have to fight them over here.
Yeah.
And now we have mayoral elections.
Right, yeah. I feel like maybe something has changed since the 90s and 2000s about fighting them over here. So, continuing with the Buchanan article, still on the subject of Lawrence Kaplan, referencing Charles Lindbergh, he accuses Paul Schroeder, Chris Matthews, Robert Novak, Georgianne Geyer, Jason Vest of The Nation, and Gary Hart of implying that members of the Bush team have been doing Israel's bidding and, by extension, exhibiting dual loyalties. Kaplan thunders. The real problem.
Let me stop you right there because this is important context. These figures that Kaplan is laying into, these are left-wing figures. I mean, Chris Matthews is the famous thrill up his leg when he heard Obama speak guy. A lot of the Zoomers won't know who any of these people are, but this is the neocons laying into the left for daring to join Buchanan in this conceit that maybe Israel has something to do with it.
Robert Novak? I
Well,
thought
no,
he,
no, he's
yeah, not Novak, yeah.
no.
And then Gary Hart is, oh, maybe I'm getting mixed up. Isn't
No,
Gary Hart the
he's
one
the
that
Nation. The Nation, for those who don't know, is one of the premier left-wing magazines of the time of that time.
right. Anyway, go ahead, Brian.
So, and I'll continue because I'll also jump back to this, but I want to get through what Kaplan is thundering here. The real problem with such claims is not just that they are untrue. The problem is that they are toxic. Invoking the specter of dual loyalty to mute criticism and debate amounts to more than the everyday pollution of public discourse. It is the nullification of public discourse. For how can one refute accusations grounded in ethnicity? The charges are, ipso facto, impossible to disprove, and so they are meant to be. So the two major points that I wanted to make here is that if this was, number one, if this was said in the modern day, I'm sure all of us would be responding to it on Twitter that it's really strange that this Kaplan guy has responded to us saying we need to put America's interests before Israel by accusing us of attacking him on ethnicity. It's a very strange retort. The other one is that, and I wish that we had an infinite number of hours for last week's stream. Charles Lindbergh is sort of the very acceptable isolationist boogeyman for interventionists to attack. The neoconservatives hate Charles Lindbergh because Charles Lindbergh was one of the few popular figures to endorse neutrality in the face of World War II. This is a major part of the book that we read last week. Once again, I recommend everyone in the audience to read it. But while we're still here on stream, Charles Lindbergh is like the archetypal, the ideal isolationist for the neoconservatives, interventionists, and any other group that really just hates traditional or heritage America, for them to hate.
Yeah,
one points.
Minor correction there, Ryan. Charles Lindbergh was one of many, a plurality of popular figures and American people who opposed entry into World War II as part of the America First movement, which included people like a young John F. Kennedy, by the way. But Charles Lindbergh was the spokesperson. You know, he was the most famous, beloved American figure who was a spokesperson for the America First movement. And so they went after him, especially when he mentioned a Jewish lobby in the United States being one of, he named like 3 different groups that he saw as really trying to get us into the war. And among those 3, he named a Jewish lobby. And so because he said there was a Jewish lobby pushing for this, they decided to use that to attack him as, you know, anti-Semitic and irrational and so forth, right?
If I remember correctly, he said there is a Jewish lobby, a British lobby, and I think a financial or a banker's lobby.
Yeah,
I can't remember.
Something like that.
Yeah. Mr. Quinn, it sounded like you had comments to make.
Oh, I just content myself with the observation that the assertion that one cannot refute accusations grounded in ethnicity could be read in 2 ways.
Something else that I find particularly worth noting here. Number one, people were using this very effeminate modern language, toxic, to shut down criticisms even back in 2003. I thought that was a very recent thing, but apparently not. It's right here in front of me. It's kind of jarring. So that's something that I just know for myself. But the other thing that I'd like to point out here is that you can absolutely refute accusations of dual loyalty. You can, not parasitize one nation for the sole benefit of another. Like that's a pretty easy thing to refute. Not like this is one of the few cases where a not all argument actually proves the based assertion, if you will. The fact that we don't just go around accusing every non-WASP of dual loyalties kind of shows that this isn't a universal ethnicity problem. This is a very specific problem to deal with people supporting the Iraq War. So that was just some other observations I had, and I'll keep going. This continues. What is going on here? Slate's Mickey Kaus nails it in the headline of his retort. Lawrence Kaplan plays the anti-Semitic card. What Kaplan, Brooks, Boot, and Kagan are doing is what the Reverend Jesse Jackson does when caught with some mammoth contradiction from a Fortune 500 company he is lately accused of discriminating. He plays the race card. So too, the neoconservatives are trying to fend off critics by assassinating their character and impugning their motives. Indeed, it is the charge of anti-Semitism itself that is toxic, for this venerable slander is designed to nullify public discourse by smearing and intimidating foes and censoring and blacklisting them and any who would publish them. Neocons say we attack them because they are Jewish. We do not. We attack them because their warmongering threatens our country, even if it finds a reliable echo in Ariel Sharon. So, something that is very important to mention here. I think a lot of, especially younger members of our circles, probably found this line of reasoning online, not from Pat Buchanan himself. That anti-Semitism is a sort of character assassinating, if not outright murderous slur at this point, designed to just completely shut down any positive policy once for your own people and country. Here is the venerable and respected Patrick Buchanan saying the exact same thing in response to the Iraq War. This is fascinating, word for word.
Yeah. There's something else here that was suggested to me in something I've been listening to recently. He says here that neocons say we attack them because they are Jewish. We do not. We attack them because their warmongering threatens our country. That is, he's saying we're attacking them for what they're doing, not what they are. Okay. And I recently heard someone say that they're actually, as they dig back into it, they're not sure that the history of anti-Semitism, that the anti-Semites were actually anti-Semitic. It was kind of a joke. But what he meant by that is, as you dig back through and you look at various episodes where there has been opposition to, Jewish power historically, and you dig into the details, you find very often that it is basically exactly what Pat Buchanan is saying here. It isn't just some sort of like the way it's portrayed, irrational, superstitious thing that is often projected backwards onto our ancestors. They just did things for no reason at all, right? It's because there were specific, criminal activities that were being done by organized Jewish power or whatever, and the people figured it out and they started to oppose it, and then later retroactively got accused of doing it for no reason, just because they were rational, torch and pitchfork bearing crazy people, So
this
anyway.
It'd be very similar to if we had an extreme overrepresentation of Italians in government, and we had a populist,
which we do,
and we had, say, a populist or nativist movement saying they wanted to attack the mafia, and then the Italians in government say something to the effect of "How dare you be this anti-Italian?" And then future generations
Right.
remember us for being anti-Italian.
It's funny you picked
Yes.
that example, Ryan, because that was actually a plot point in The Godfather 3. You had this character, Joey Zaza, who was making a splash in the media, accusing various people of anti-Italian prejudice, trying to do the same game, and he ends up getting shot. But it's funny you brought Italians up, because that actually is in a movie.
Right, yeah. And it's, I mean, that would make sense. There's some analogies I'm sure that the movie makers or any people that would have funded it would have liked to talk about. So this is I think that Stephen brings up a great point, and this is part of why the series here is such a very valuable and productive thing. It is always great to reanalyze your own history through the lens of the people that were actually in the history, doing it from a more positive angle, because certain narratives or memes or pop histories might not actually hold up to the primary history itself.
Yeah, you need to know why people were actually doing what they were doing, not what people retroactively said about it a generation or two later. Right.
Right. So I'll keep going here just in the interest of continuing. Buchanan continues, and this time the boys have cried wolf once too often. It is not working. As Kaus notes, Kaplan's own New Republic carries Harvard professor Stanley Hoffman. In writing of the 4 power centers in this capital that are clamoring for war, Hoffman describes the fourth thus. And finally, there is a loose collection of friends of Israel who believe in the identity of interests between the Jewish state and the United States. These analysts look on foreign policy through the lens of one dominant concern. Is it good or bad for Israel? Since that nation's founding in 1948, these thinkers have never been in very good odor at the State Department, but now they are well ensconced in the Pentagon, around such strategists as Paul Wolfowitz, Richard Perle, and Douglas Feith. If Stanley Hoffman can say this, asks Kaus, why can't Chris Matthews? Kaus also notes that Kaplan somehow failed to mention the most devastating piece tying the neoconservatives to Sharon and his Likud party. I'll pause just before continuing there.
Well, I love the clarity of who was this? Stanley Hoffman, I guess?
Yes.
Yeah. He says, these analysts look on foreign policy through the lens of one dominant concern. Is it good or bad for Israel? I mean, has anyone said it more clearly since? I mean, there you go. Boom.
Well,
write it on the chalkboard 100 times, right?
I mean, I was going to say, I think I have heard this line from many people now labeled woke right. It's very strange that as we continue to read through Buchanan, like, I have heard all of this from anons or even non-anons online, but they get libeled or slandered, perhaps, by a very similar group to a lot of these people that we're talking about here. Ex-lefties that might be finding their home back on the left sometime soon. These same people today, the next generation, even though we speak the exact same things as Buchanan was in 2003, will label us with another slur, woke right, anti-Semite, or whatever else.
But Ryan, how can this be? I was assured that the woke right are a radical reaction to the woke left and a mirror image thereof.
I mean, I also find it fascinating because of this other stupid theory that says that the woke right is an entirely new phenomenon caused by a lack of parenting or something like that. Like apparently Patrick Buchanan didn't have a present father and mother or something like that.
Yeah, and I should just, since we brought up the term woke right, I should mention the amusing project of our friend Millennial Woes, who keeps updating a graphic that he shares on Twitter where he does a Venn diagram of people who are Zionists and people who use the term woke right, that is, use it as a slur. And it's, of course, complete overlap of these two groups. And he actually researches it, being a careful guy as he is. He will actually check and find them making very blunt, pro-Israel, pro-Zionist type statements. And then also, of course, them throwing the accusation woke right at people. So it is literally, a Zionist trick.
Right. Yes, exactly. And I'll continue because it's just going to keep adding indictments onto this supposed group of public intellectuals. In a February 9th front page article in the Washington Post, Robert Kaiser quotes a senior U.S. official as saying, "The Likudniks are really in charge now." Kaiser names Perle, Wolfowitz, and Feith as members of a pro-Israel network inside the administration, and adds David Wormser of the Defense Department and Elliot Abrams of the National Security Council. Abrams is the son-in-law of Norman Podhoretz, editor emeritus of Commentary, whose magazine has for decades branded critics of Israel as anti-Semites. Just as an aside real quick, in the neoconservative reader that I was talking about, the neoconservatives' own positive vision for neoconservatism, Norman Podhoretz's essay is what begins it, and it is the most uncomfortable essay I have ever read. I did a stream on it with Paul Fahrenheit.
I remember that stream.
I quite frankly do not care whatever Norman Podhoretz calls anyone, because I've seen inside of his mind. It is unnaturally warped in ways that escape elucidation. So, continuing. Noting that Sharon repeatedly claims a special closeness to the Bushites, Kaiser writes, "For the first time, a U.S. administration and a Likud government are pursuing nearly identical policies. And a valid question is, How did this come to be? And while it is surely in Sharon's interests, is it in America's interests? So this is almost exactly what I can find on Twitter. Anytime that someone in a Republican administration announces that they are going to do something warlike, I can almost always find the majority of the comments saying that, like, well, this is clearly in, usually Israel's interests, but how is this America first? Isn't this just Israel first? This is perhaps a slightly new wording that Buchanan didn't write about in 2003 because there was no MAGA or renewed America First movement in its modern form. But it's exactly the same thing. Everyone that tries to criticize, say, the Trump administration for being interventionist when it should be America First is repeating exactly what Buchanan wrote here in 2003. The fact that it's controversial now, I think, shows a degradation on the part of perhaps a genuine right in power.
Yeah, and all we've added, I guess, is that now we have MIGA, Make Israel Great Again, as a play off of MAGA that gets thrown at people who are we're alleging that they're acting in Israel's interests. Yeah.
Right. So I'll continue because this is where I really find the tempo of the article to increase. This is a time for truth, for America is about to make a momentous decision whether to launch a series of wars in the Middle East that could ignite the clash of civilizations against which Harvard professor Samuel Huntington has warned, a war we believe would be a tragedy and a disaster for this republic. To avert this war, to answer the neocon smears, we ask that our readers review their agenda as stated in their words. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. As Al Smith used to say, nothing un-American can live in the sunlight. We charge that a cabal of polemicists and public officials seek to ensnare our country in a series of wars that are not in America's interests. We charge them with colluding with Israel to ignite those wars and destroy the Oslo Accords. We charge them with deliberately damaging U.S. relations with every state in the Arab world that defies Israel or supports the Palestinian people's right to a homeland of their own. We charge that they have alienated friends and allies all over the Islamic and Western world through their arrogance, hubris, and bellicosity. So I'll stop here because this is the main charge, the thesis, and whatnot else, basic literature analysis stuff. But you'll note here that Buchanan's also talking about this very woke right idea of a people's right to a homeland of their own. I was assured that this is evil ethno-nationalism, it's anti-Western, or whatever else, but here we have Buchanan saying that it's a right. Yeah, right. Of course, that's the the only exception.
Yeah, so, and what's remarkable reading this powerful paragraph all these years later is to think about the striking image that if you haven't seen it, go look it up. The striking image of Netanyahu speaking to a nearly empty auditorium at the United Nations, as almost all the representatives of the nations around the world got up and left, rather than be lectured by him. So this suggests that if the U.S. continues to act in this way, to alienate anyone who isn't on Israel's side, it's going to be like U.S. and Israel versus the world at this point, because the actions in Gaza have alienated everyone who wasn't alienated already.
Well, right, and I think that that's a pretty natural course of events. Buchanan in 2003 talking about a people's right to their homeland. If you deny that, it's pretty clear what the alternative is if you have another group who does apparently have a right to a homeland, who just so happens to need to remove that population that only has that territory within the other. That's Stephen, I believe that your typing is being recorded by the microphone. But this is a very predictable outcome, and something that I also find interesting is that this is being spoken in the future tense. Can you imagine if the United States launched a series of wars in the Middle East and bogged down multiple generations there? Can you imagine what that would do to the country?
The mind boggles.
Like, once again, I was born a few months after this article, and I think it was only 3 months after this article was written that we had some form of victory declared in Iraq or whatever else. I
Shock
forget.
and awe.
Yeah. So, I and many other people, many other Zoomers in our spheres have only ever known a world in which the United States is seemingly irreparably in the Middle East. I'm sure Mr. Quinn and Mr. Carson here on the panel will have something short to say on what a warfaring empire does to a people. I'll leave some of the specifics of that to them. It is, and we'll discuss this in future weeks. Something that it absolutely does do is it destroys your culture if, as was with the Americans, your culture was built upon ideals that were mostly, say, peaceful, centered around things like commerce, production, development of your own people, or whatnot else. If you invade multiple countries across the world, send your generations there, a whole bunch of money to there and to special interests at home and abroad, it's no wonder that, say, the culture is going to be harmed by it. It's a cultural contradiction. But Mr. Quinn, Mr. Carson.
Yeah, I mean, there's the obvious material angle. It was financially ruinous for the country's treasury. It was physically ruinous for so many thousands of American men who were mutilated in the war. It was psychologically ruinous for so many of them that came back with unbelievable trauma. But you're right, it is morally ruinous. The practice of empire, as we embarked upon in 2003 particularly, has undermined the fabric of our entire society, both metaphysically and physically. Metaphysically, in that we've developed a callousness towards our fellow man, which is, just tragic. And then physically, in that, again, the people we were fighting over there, they're here now.
Yeah, invade the world, invite the world, and it actually goes in that order, I've noticed.
Yeah.
My own city now has a Bosnian community after Clinton's involvement in the Yugoslavia war.
Mm-hmm.
And I've noticed this pattern. The same thing for the UK. Wherever they were involved, those are the people who are now immigrating into the UK.
This is something interesting that I think might not get picked up on, and I'll let you continue after this. But I noticed that the international refugee system was not that big of an issue until the United States and then all of its allies and Israel started to invade countries, and then suddenly those countries needed refugees to go elsewhere. This seems like something that an Israeli-based foreign policy ruined, was this sort of international refugee system. You didn't, even though we have small populations in cities from prior wars than the Middle Eastern interventions, we weren't worried about the United States Yugoslavizing as a result of the intervention, whereas I can't help but feel that we have other concerns now.
Yugoslavizing is the apt example to pick.
Sorry, Stephen, I believe I interrupted you.
Well, actually, why don't you just finish these last two paragraphs, because that completes this section, and then we can make any comments before we move into the neoconservative section here.
Yeah, that sounds good. He continues, "Not in our lifetimes has America been so isolated from old friends. Far worse, President Bush is being lured into a trap baited for him by these neocons that could cost him his office and cause America to forfeit years of peace won for us by the sacrifices of 2 generations in the Cold War. They charge us with anti-Semitism, i.e. a hatred for Jews for their faith, heritage, or ancestry. False. The truth is, those hurling these charges harbor a passionate attachment to a nation not our own that causes them to subordinate the interests of their own country and to act on an assumption that somehow what's good for Israel is good for America."
Wonderful last phrase there, because, what was the old saying, what's good for GM is good for America, or whatever. This is what people say when they are not really taking the interests of the people. They're trying to substitute the broad interests for the broad interests of the people, the interest of, a particular special interest group or a company, or in this case, a foreign country. Right. And we see it again and again. It's not only the Zionists that do this. They just have been more effective than a lot of the others.
Ryan and I have chronicled over the last 10 or so episodes the numerous warnings which the founders issued against people subordinating the public interest to their own private interests. And this is a concrete example of that.
Yes, exactly. There was something else that was striking. Pat Buchanan was a Cold Warrior,
Hmm.
right? And so it's very interesting what he does in that paragraph where he mentions the Cold War, the way he frames it, because some people, and I think Pat Buchanan was one of those persons. Some people thought, well, the Soviet Union is a unique threat, and not my favorite thing, but we're going to have to, arm up, and we're going to have to oppose the Soviet Union. Then once the Soviet Union fell, some of those people, not as many as I would have liked, like Pat Buchanan said, great, now it's time for the peace dividend. The Cold War is over. We're going to get the blessings, as he implies here. We're going to get the blessings and benefits of what we sacrificed for. We won. Victory. Let's reap the dividends, right? And then others who by the late 90s, by this time, ended up really in power, others were like, no, it's not over at all. The apparatus, the bureaucratic, military, imperial apparatus that was built during the Cold War, who was it, Hillary Clinton or something? Why do you have this whole thing if we're not going to use it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was their attitude. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I'll just make the point that Thomas 777 has remarked innumerable times that the regime was built to fight the Cold War, and it can't change its stripes. It's still trying to fight the Cold War. And if the Soviets aren't there, we'll fight the Islamists. And when the Russians get back on their feet, we'll go back to fighting the Russians. But the war goes on.
Right. And as he points out, right, it becomes increasingly sort of insane, the attempt to act like the Cold War is still going on, so to speak, and to use this whole apparatus that was built for that singular purpose and try to continue to use it. It just makes no sense. It's sort of it's irrational in a way that offends our friend Thomas.
And the most tragic part of it is that it won't continue to not make sense for long as we reassemble the whole world in coalition against us.
Right.
Yeah, and I'll continue there because I think that last line is going to be difficult to top. So Buchanan continues on to describe the neoconservatives, these people that he actually dislikes. The thing that separates him from the charge of anti-Semitism, at least in his eyes. He continues, who are the neoconservatives? The first generation were ex-liberals, socialists, and Trotskyites, boat people from the McGovern Revolution who rafted over to the GOP at the end of conservatism's long march to power with Ronald Reagan in 1980.
Yeah, and that point about the McGovern Revolution is salient because that was kind of the turning point when the non-interventionist right kind of started to reassemble itself, and both Radlib and I have ancestors who were part of the McGovern campaign. So it's and of course as with Pat Buchanan. So it's a salient point.
Right, and I'll just continue in the interest of time because it'll elaborate the point. Buchanan continues, a neoconservative, wrote Kevin Phillips back then, is more likely to be a magazine editor than a bricklayer. Today, he or she is more likely to be a resident scholar at a public policy institute, such as the American Enterprise Institute, or one of its clones like the Center for Security Policy, or the Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs. As one wag writes, a neocon is more familiar with the inside of a think tank than an Abrams tank. Almost none came out of the business world or military, and few, if any, came out of the Goldwater campaign. The heroes they invoke are Woodrow Wilson, FDR, Harry Truman, Martin Luther King, and Democratic Senators Henry Scoop Jackson and Pat Moynihan.
As I read that list, I thought, wait, is he talking about Sandbach? I'm sorry, that's very unfair. Very unfair. Don't tell him I said that.
Don't worry, I'm reliably informed that Sandbach does not listen to this stream.
one point of interest as well is that I've noticed increasing attempts to sort of make almost all of these figures, except for King, on the list based in some way. I think that this is a misplaced overcorrection, especially considering the earlier point in the stream that most of the people here that still brought these figures into vogue are still alive and running, or their most direct offspring are.
Yeah.
So
And the Wilson, FDR, Truman revisionism must stop. It is utterly misplaced and pernicious.
well, it's a very explicit sort of mimetic war against heritage Americans, quite explicitly. This is what the neoconservatives want you to lionize. The neoconservatives do not have your interests as a heritage American in mind. It is worth remembering that.
Did want to call out one name here that is really key if you want to do deep dives on the neocons, and that's Democratic Senator Henry Scoop Jackson. If you know that name, it will serve you well. For example, because I knew the name Henry Jackson, I had Douglas Murray's number a long time ago because I noted that he was a director, associate director or something at the time at the Henry Jackson Society. And then that raised the red flag for me because I knew what that meant. I knew that signaled neocon. And sure enough, I found that he had a book called Neoconservatism.
Yes,
and
right.
so I never saw him as a fellow conservative or anything like that. I knew what he was right away. So remember that. Henry Scoop Jackson, very important name.
I just want to throw out that wag is a pejorative which has lamentably fallen out of fashion.
Yes.
Very good. All right, and I'll finish out this sort of description of the neoconservatives, and this is the key point, as Buchanan notes. All are interventionists who regard Stakhanovite support of Israel as a defining characteristic of their breed. Among their luminaries are Jean Kirkpatrick, Bill Bennett, Michael Novak, and James Q. Wilson. Their publications include the Weekly Standard, Commentary, the New Republic, National Review, and the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal. Though few in number, they wield disproportionate power through control of the conservative foundations and magazines, through their syndicated columns, and by attaching themselves to men of power. There's a lot of connections that are being made here, some of which we probably cannot talk about on this platform. Something that I will mention is that it's very easy to see how they are firmly attached to the sort of neoconservative media complex. This is also kind of why the OGC's work is important. The more that you can just maneuver around the old conservative media complex, and then at a wider extent too, on a league above ours, people like Tucker Carlson, or whoever else, these independents, populists, nativists. Any work that they or we do is deliberately trying to render this neoconservative, or this originally neoconservative media complex obsolete. We're actually defeating enemies of heritage America by taking power out of their hands, making information something that we get to talk about and control.
Yes, that's a very important point. The information war now has many sides.
So this is something also that I want to mention. Jean Kirkpatrick, born in Oklahoma, originally a Trotskyite, a fully committed Trotskyite, and then gets appointed as the our liaison to the United Nations under the Reagan government. Interesting connection. I since, due to Buchanan's own personal history, I imagine he's not going to attach the Reagan administration to this group as much, but whether just out of like pure power politics and then perhaps a mistake letting them get too far, or perhaps he had sympathies, I don't really care which one it was. The Reagan administration gave these people a lot of power such that they could have two Bush presidencies very close in time to each other. So I'll continue on here under the section titled Beating the War Drums. When the Cold War ended, these neoconservatives began casting about for a new crusade to give meaning to their lives. It's relevant to what we were talking about. On September 11th, their time came. They seized on that horrific atrocity to steer America's rage into all-out war to destroy their despised enemies, the Arab and Islamic rogue states that have resisted U.S. hegemony and loathe Israel. The war party's plan, however, had been in preparation far in advance of 9/11. And when President Bush, after defeating the Taliban, was looking for a new front in the war on terror, they put their pre-cooked meal in front of him. Bush dug into it. Before introducing the scriptwriters of America's future wars, consider the rapid and synchronized reaction of the neocons to what happened after that fateful day.
Yeah, I'd recommend just read through this whole timeline before we comment, because you've got to feel the power of his documenting literally in the
these
week
are the
after
receipts
9/11.
he's about to post.
Yeah,
right.
Go for it.
And something to keep in mind in the audience, this is like the world-rocking event. You know, it'd be difficult to just magically come up with things right after it. This is a tragic and chaotic time. So, on September 12th, Americans were still in shock when Bill Bennett told CNN that we were in a struggle between good and evil, that the Congress must declare war on militant Islam, and that overwhelming force must be used. Bennett cited Lebanon, Libya, Syria, Iraq, Iran, and China as targets for attack.
Ah, yes, the militantly Islamic China.
Not, however, Afghanistan, the sanctuary of Osama's terrorists. How did Bennett know which nations must be smashed before he had any idea who attacked us? The Wall Street Journal immediately offered up a specific target list, calling for U.S. airstrikes on terrorist camps in Syria, Sudan, Libya, and Algeria, and perhaps even in parts of Egypt. Yet not one of Bennett's 6 countries, nor one of these 5, had anything to do with 9/11. On September 15th, according to Bob Woodward's Bush at War, Paul Wolfowitz put forth military arguments to justify a U.S. attack on Iraq rather than Afghanistan. Why Iraq? Because Wolfowitz argued in the War Cabinet, while attacking Afghanistan would be uncertain, Iraq was a brittle, oppressive regime that might break easily. It was doable. On September 20th, 40 neoconservatives sent an open letter to the White House instructing President Bush on how the war on terror must be conducted. Signed by Bennett, Podhoretz, Kirkpatrick, Pearl, Crystal, and Washington Post columnist Charles Krauthammer, the letter was an ultimatum. To return the signer's support, the president was told, to retain the signer's support, the president was told he must target Hezbollah for destruction, retaliate against Syria and Iran if they refuse to sever ties to Hezbollah, and overthrow Saddam. Any failure to attack Iraq, the signers warned Bush, will constitute an early and perhaps decisive surrender in the war on international terrorism. I believe that closes out the timeline, which is astounding, quite frankly.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, he names things that happen in the next 9 days. All of that was in 9 days after 9/11. I also want to bring up something, and I don't know if you'd remember this, Auberon Quinn. On the day itself, September 11th, I swear they were already talking about Osama bin Laden.
Oh, they were.
Remember. Yeah, they named him right away.
Yeah, he within like an hour, he was fingered as the one responsible.
Yeah. How did they know? Or did they? Or
I've always time, as I recall, was that Al Qaeda had claimed credit. Whether that's true or not, I'm not sure, but that's what they ran with.
Huh. What I wanted to mention, though, is that the big missing piece here, which maybe in the week after you could believe, but eventually we learned a little bit more about the hijackers, is that Saudi Arabia, it will come up later, but you don't see it in any of this timeline. But the hijackers were mostly Saudis.
Yes, we very fortuitously discovered their Saudi passports in the wreckage, so it was mostly Saudis.
Right. So supposedly it was Saudis, but they're talking about seemingly a random from an American response to 9/11 point of view. It's like they're just throwing random darts at the map.
Yeah, bomb all the country.
Yeah, of course they're not random, as Buchanan is making that point, right? But they're random from the point of view of what was being sold, which is we need to respond to this horrible attack on us. We need to respond to 9/11. Very plausible thing to say, right?
Mhm.
And therefore we'll attack, and they start naming these random countries,
Well, yeah, and with hindsight, we can notice a pattern. If we can, on the screen, go back to the paragraph beginning on September 12th, something that I would just like to point out. Bennett gives us Lebanon, Libya, Syria, Iraq, Iran, and China, which is very fascinating to me because that is almost entirely an almost perfect list of countries that we specifically intervened in, destabilized, and destroyed. Iran and China in the works, at least. Those are the ones in the target. It's very strange that the day after 9/11, Bennett had a perfect roadmap for how the next decade and a half to 2 decades would play out.
Yeah.
Like, we are in the process right now where we still hear about how Iran and China are the main things that need to be destroyed for America to be free, prosperous, safe, whatever else. And then if we look at something else, say Lebanon, you don't hear about America and Lebanon all that much, but something that's pretty historically recursive is that Israel really likes to occupy Lebanon. They have a very strong interest in Lebanon. But people, especially anyone that remembers, say, like the 2016 election, would definitely remember U.S. intervention in Libya. Most recently, U.S. intervention in Syria. Iraq is, of course, the titular country for the war that's under discussion. Iran, very recent. The Trump admin, for whatever reason, is still going off of Bennett's list. And then a lot of the GOP and even people that are supposedly our guys in our sphere and our spheres still talk about how China is a big threat to the United States. It is very strange that we are still following this list that Bill Bennett put out for CNN the day after 9/11. So,
sorry, we got some information from our director here. Al-Qaeda took credit for 9/11 on October 29th, 2004.
Oh,
with
wow.
a video message from Osama. He denied involvement until then. They denied involvement for 3 years, but the U.S. government fingered Osama on 9/11, the day itself. So make of that what you will.
Yeah, I could swear day of they were saying Al-Qaeda claimed credit, but of course the media would never lie, so I don't know what to think.
I hear there's a popular media figure that's making a documentary about 9/11, Tucker Carlson, so maybe he'll have something for us to refresh our memories. But to continue, just in the interest of time, Buchanan continues, here was a cabal of intellectuals telling the commander-in-chief 9 days after an attack on America that if he did not follow their war plans, he would be charged with surrendering to terror. Yet Hezbollah had nothing to do with 9/11. What had Hezbollah done? Hezbollah had humiliated Israel by driving its army out of Lebanon. President Bush had been warned. He was to exploit the attack of 9/11 to launch a series of wars on Arab regimes, none of which had attacked us. All, however, were enemies of Israel. Bibi Netanyahu, the former prime minister of Israel, like some
wouldn't that be
latter-day...
a nice phrase to say in the current day and age?
Like some latter-day citizen, Jeanette, was ubiquitous on American television, calling for us to crush the Empire of Terror. The empire, it turns out, consisted of Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, Iraq, and the Palestinian enclave. If the references to 9/11 for the last few paragraphs were cut out, this feels like it could still be in the news cycle today, and I would be worrying the Trump administration would be following it still.
I mean, what a giveaway. Hezbollah, the Palestinian enclave. Yeah, we get
hold on,
attacked
Red.
on
I've got a
9/11 by
map out and I'm
Saudis.
putting pins in them. Let me just read them out and I'll put the pins in and see if I can detect a pattern.
Right. Yeah.
So
anyway, keep going.
Yeah. Buchanan continues, nasty as some of these regimes and groups might be, what had they done to the United States? The war party seemed desperate to get a Middle East war going before America had second thoughts. Tom Donnelly of the Project for the New American Century called for an immediate invasion of Iraq. Nor need the attack await the deployment of 500,000 troops. The larger challenge will be occupying Iraq after the fighting is over, he wrote.
I mean, to be fair, that was true.
Yeah, it's very true. It's just strange that it was planned out with such accuracy this early on. And Buchanan continues, Donnelly was echoed by Jonah Goldberg of National Review. The United States needs to go to war with Iraq because it needs to go to war with someone in the region, and Iraq makes the most sense. What an airtight argument. I'm so glad that we sacrificed our culture, manpower, treasury, the country, basically, because we just needed to go to war, and it makes the most sense.
And I mean, I'll just say what Academic Agent says about moments like this. Jonah Goldberg was at National Review for that purpose. That was why he was there. He was finally fulfilling his purpose by endorsing, this neocon war.
Well, and that since we talked about betrayal of the American right last week, I'm going to reference it in the series from now on. This is something that Rothbard talks about throughout the book, is that the National Review purely exists to destroy the old right, to replace it with something that was pro-war, so that the warfare state could just continue to move on unopposed.
Right.
Goldberg and the National Review would fit right into that, even though we're in 2003 and not in the middle of the Cold War. So I'll continue here. Buchanan writes, Goldberg endorsed the Ledeen doctrine of ex-Pentagon official Michael Ledeen, which Goldberg describes thus. Every 10 years or so, the United States needs to pick up some small, crappy little country and throw it against the wall, just to show we mean business. When the French ambassador in London at a dinner party asked why we would risk World War III over some shitty little country, meaning Israel, Goldberg's magazine was not amused. So this is, I think, very important that Buchanan is lambasting this, because once again, a sort of overcorrection in our spheres. I see people that are perhaps tired of perhaps foreign elements that used to be popular in our spheres, or maybe even historical revisionists in our own, that get too tired of a negative American stance due to America's international actions post-World War II, or even during World War II.
Yeah, just as a side note. No, sorry, finish.
I was going to say, and I see them revert back to this, that like, it's good when America demonstrates her power. We need to be terrorizing the world. Like, you should look who you're repeating if you start to think these things. Goldberg, Ledeen, these people at the National Review and in the Pentagon during the Bush administration. Once again, this is not Heritage America. Heritage Americans do not like invading parts of the world just to bully countries. In fact, some of the greatest presidents that Heritage Americana supporters will elevate, people like, say, the progressive presidents, Teddy Roosevelt being the first one that comes to mind, did not support just invading parts of the world to bully them. He specifically articulated a doctrine to where you don't have to do that to show your power. So it's just something to consider. I have my own qualms with the progressive presidents, say, but it's something for those in our sphere to consider. Mr. Quinn.
Well, first, tune in December 1st for more on this. And then secondly, just as a side note, France at this time was particularly reluctant to go along with the invasion of Iraq. And so you had this outburst of anti-French agitation initiated by the neocons and picked up by the general culture, which resulted in things like French fries being renamed freedom fries and all sorts of other inanities. It's just another idiosyncratic anecdote from the time.
Yeah, and in a great moment, great redemptive moment, the politician who came up with the term freedom fries later completely reversed his views on these matters and deeply regretted it, and really fought against neocon wars. I'm forgetting his name, but yeah.
And it's an object lesson that Radio Uganda, the crowd effect of people being whipped up into a frenzy to do irrational things, is still very much with us.
Yep.
And as anyone that could tell you, as you two, I'm sure, could tell the audience, that the sort of crowd effect doesn't just apply to a whole country; it applies to specific groups that you're a part of.
Mm-hmm.
So something to keep in mind, which is perhaps why, say, the historical revisionists in our spheres that are against people like Bush and other more modern intervening presidents, they are aggressive, and perhaps they should be that way. Perhaps they should indiscriminately put down attempts to compromise on that. So I'll continue the article in the interest of time. Buchanan says, Ledeen, however, is less frivolous. In The War Against the Terror Masters, he identifies the exact regimes America must destroy. First and foremost, we must bring down the terror regimes, beginning with the big three, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. And then we have to come to grips with Saudi Arabia. Once the tyrants in Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Saudi Arabia have been brought down, we will remain engaged. We have to ensure the fulfillment of the democratic revolution. Stability is an unworthy American mission and a misleading concept to boot. We do not want stability in Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and even Saudi Arabia. We want things to change. The real issue is not whether, but how to destabilize.
So that phrase, the democratic revolution, does that strike anyone as a familiar language?
Maybe an international, worldwide democratic revolution?
Yeah, I wonder what figure that might come from.
This continues. Rejecting stability as an unworthy American mission, the dean goes on to define America's authentic, historic mission. Creative destruction is our middle name, both within our society and abroad. We tear down the old order every day, from business to science, literature, art, architecture, and cinema, to politics and the law. Our enemies have always hated this whirlwind of energy and creativity which menaces their traditions, whatever they may be, and shames them for their inability to keep peace. We must destroy them to advance our historic mission. And to answer the...
So this paragraph boils my blood because it makes one think that Academic Agent has a point.
Well, and this is I'll articulate my view on this really quickly for the audience. Creative destruction, of course, was a term coined by Joseph Schumpeter. In all of his works, I think it shows up in only one, and it's in the one where he is lamenting that this process of creative destruction will eventually bring about something like communism or socialism and destroy the old political orders. It's in that same book, and it's not mentioned that often. And also notably, he only applies creative destruction to industry economics. That's it. This is a horrific misreading if one wanted to be Schumpeterian. And even if it wasn't a misreading, it completely misses the point. It's almost as if this is a Trotskyite speaking who is happy with what Schumpeter concluded. As if.
Right.
And it seems...
Go ahead.
And it seems Buchanan agrees, because he goes on to say, just briefly, passages like this owe more to Leon Trotsky than to Robert Taft, and betray a Jacobin streak in neoconservatism that cannot be reconciled with any concept of true conservatism.
Yes, exactly so. And so I wrote this tweet a couple months ago. Since Iraq, Syria, Libya, Lebanon, and Somalia are dealt with, I'm sure that once the Palestinians are ethnically cleansed and Iran is in chaos, then Israel will feel safe and we can have peace. They'll just stop at that point. Now, the humor in my tweet makes more sense after what we just read.
Yeah.
This totalizing global revolutionary ethos, right? Which, and he correctly points to Trotsky. Trotsky famously objected to the idea of socialism in one country. No, that can't work. It has to be everywhere. There has to be revolution everywhere. We can't settle for revolutionary change in one place. It has to be global. It has to be a global revolution.
And
neocons call it a global democratic revolution. As Hoppe has helped us see, the difference between a global socialist revolution and a global democratic revolution is not a substantive difference, shall we say.
No, there's some sort of, I guess you could call it an animating revolutionary spirit behind both.
Exactly.
Quite so. So I'll continue. To the Weekly Standard, Ledeen's enemies list was too restrictive. We must not only declare war on terror networks and states that harbor terrorists, said the Standard, we should launch wars on any group or government inclined to support or sustain others like them in the future. Robert Kagan and William Crystal were giddy with excitement at the prospect of Armageddon. The coming war is going to spread and engulf a number of countries. It is going to resemble the clash of civilizations that everyone has hoped to avoid. It is possible that the demise of some moderate Arab regimes may be just around the corner. And it somehow continues. Norman Podhoretz in commentary even outdid Crystal's standard, rhapsodizing that we should embrace a war of civilizations, as it is George W. Bush's mission to fight World War IV, the war against militant Islam. By his count, the regimes that richly deserve to be overthrown are not confined to the three singled out members of the axis of evil, Iraq, Iran, North Korea. At a minimum, the axis should extend to Syria and Lebanon and Libya, as well as friends of America, like the Saudi royal family and Egypt's Hosni Mubarak, that is unfamiliar to me, along with the Palestinian Authority. Bush must reject the timorous counsels of the incorrigibly cautious Colin Powell, wrote Podhoretz, and find the stomach to impose a new political culture on the defeated Islamic world. As the war against Al-Qaeda requires that we destroy the Taliban, and I'll pause there real quick, because what level of neoconservatism do you have to be at for Colin Powell to be the restraining voice of reason?
They did have to be fair, I think they did literally have to trick him, and with fake intelligence, and then later he realized that he had been tricked and publicly said he regretted it. Right.
As long as we're doing trivia, Hosni Mubarak, they did get him. He went down in the Arab Spring.
Right.
Yes. It's amazing how everything that this group called for and the justifications they used just came to pass. It's fascinating. I'll continue. As the war against Al-Qaeda required that we destroy the Taliban, Podhoretz wrote, "We may willy-nilly find ourselves forced to topple 5 or 6 or 7 more tyrannies in the Islamic world, including that other sponsor of terrorism, Yasser Arafat's Palestinian Authority. I can even imagine the turmoil of this war leading to some new species of an imperial mission for America, whose purpose would be to oversee the emergence of successor governments in the region more amenable to reform and modernization than the despotisms now in place. I can also envisage the establishment of some kind of American protectorate over the oil fields of Saudi Arabia. As we more and more come to wonder why 7,000 princes should go on being permitted to exert so much leverage over us and everyone else. Could you imagine if some Middle Eastern state was guiding the United States policy? Maybe
in
Qatar?
spite of my intense reluctance, we just may be forced to topple 1,000 countries and impose imperial control over the Middle East. I mean, I can see it happening. All I'm saying is I can imagine it.
So, something that I wanted to touch on a more meta level as well is that it's very difficult to counter a lot of this, especially amongst younger guys who might not have actually lived through this. A lot of the rhetoric being used here sounds very vital. It's very energetic, as opposed to people like Buchanan and paleocons may come across as less vital or less energetic. But this is I think this is a deception or a worse than Faustian bargain. I think it's just an outright deception. We'll talk about this, I think, in a future stream. We will be covering William Graham Sumner's decrying of the United States imperial ambition. If you think about it for more than 5 minutes, this sort of imperial project for America has been anything but vitalizing and energetic. The younger generations are not characterized by their, immense energy, ready to go and conquer the world. No one likes the Iraq War anymore. People are tired of forever wars. Everyone is tired. This is the consequence of this policy being implemented. So that was like a meta point I wanted to make, something that I keep seeing.
No, that's not a connection I had drawn before. That's very good.
So I'll continue. Podhoretz credits Elliot Cohen with the phrase World War IV. Bush was shortly thereafter seen carrying about a gift copy of Cohen's book that celebrates civilian mastery of the military in times of war, as exhibited by such leaders as Winston Churchill and David Ben-Gurion. A list of the Middle East regimes that Podhoretz, Bennett, Ladine, Netanyahu, and the Wall Street Journal regard as targets for destruction thus includes Algeria, Libya, Egypt, Sudan, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Palestinian Authority, and militant Islam. I think the only country on there that didn't end up being destabilized is like Tunisia, right?
Well, Iran has, the Iranian regime has survived so far.
Well, hold on. Wasn't Tunisia where the Arab Spring started, or am I misremembering?
That's what I'm saying. I haven't heard it yet, and that's one of the ones that ended up getting got.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Like it's an omission. Like somehow Tunisia wiggled its way into the target.
Collateral damage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. So, cui bono? For whose benefit these endless wars in the region that holds nothing vital to America save oil, debatable, which the Arabs must sell us to survive? Who would benefit from a war of civilizations between the West and Islam? Answer: one nation, one leader, one party. Israel, Sharon, Likud.
Yeah, a great line. It's one I remember that did stick in my head. Having said that, I have to say I think that's a little bit of a mistake, and I see people doing it now in some cases. Basically, and in some cases, I think sort of Zionists who realize that Israel may be not doing so well in the PR wars right now, and so they try to focus the anger at Netanyahu specifically, right? But as I think this whole article is spelling out, this is bigger than Ariel Sharon. It's bigger than Bibi Netanyahu. We have a pattern of behavior that continues regardless of who the prime minister of Israel is, right?
Well, and the big issue is that it's within the gates. Like, if it was just this party and prime minister of Israel wants to do all of this crazy stuff and that was the end of it, none of us would care. We would not be on the stream. American history would be very different over the last few decades. But that's not the case. We have people that Buchanan keeps very nicely listing out for us who are within the gates, advising presidential administrations, hijacking political parties and movements. And we today have to deal with their offspring and the likes of, say, a James Lindsay or whatever, who keeps suppressing us so that these types can continue to march on. So,
exactly.
Yeah, this is far from just Israel. There are enemies in the gates. So Buchanan continues, indeed, Sharon has been everywhere the echo of his acolytes in America. In February 2003, Sharon told a delegation of congressmen that after Saddam's regime is destroyed, it is of vital importance that the United States disarm Iran, Syria, and Libya. We have a great interest in shaping the Middle East the day after the war on Iraq. Defense Minister Shaul Mofaz told the Conference of Major American Jewish Organizations. After U.S. troops enter Baghdad, the United States must generate political, economic, diplomatic pressure on Iran. Mofaz admonished the American Jews.
Just note the timing here. That was February 2003 that Ariel Sharon is outlining the next steps after Iraq. That is the month before the invasion of Iraq. He was already thinking about the next chess moves after that, right?
Right.
And telling them to congressmen, right? Setting them up, preloading the plan for what should happen next.
As seemingly every member of this neocon coalition was doing. Like, this is fascinating to me.
Yeah. The coordinated organized minority, right?
As I'd say, I envy the level of organization. Hopefully we can soon beat that. So Buchanan continues, are the neoconservatives concerned about a war on Iraq bringing down friendly Arab governments? Not at all. They would welcome it. Mubarak is no great shakes, says Richard Pearl of the president of Egypt. Surely we can do better than Mubarak. Asked about the possibility that a war on Iraq, which he predicted would be a cakewalk, might upend governments in Egypt and Saudi Arabia, former UN Ambassador Ken Adelman told Joshua Micah Marshall of Washington Monthly, All the better, if you ask me. On July 10th, 2002, Pearl invited a former aide to Lyndon LaRoche's, Lyndon LaRoche named Laurent. Sorry, I've been speaking a lot here.
Polish name.
Yes.
So Auberon
Yeah.
Quinn should know how to say it, right?
On July 10th, 2002, Pearl invited a former aide to Lyndon LaRoche named Laurent Morawiecki to address the Defense Policy Board. In a briefing that startled Henry Kissinger, Morawiecki named Saudi Arabia as the kernel of evil, the prime mover, the most dangerous opponent of the United States. The audacity to call Saudi Arabia a prime mover in any
Yeah, especially in light of today when we know it is in fact Qatar.
Yeah, right, yes.
I did want to mention very quickly, Richard Pearl had a nickname, and I looked it up to make sure my memory was right. And in fact, there's a book that made that, kept that nickname official. It's called Prince of Darkness, Richard Pearl, The Kingdom, the Power, and the End of Empire in America by Alan Weissman. So, Richard Pearl's nickname was indeed the Prince of Darkness. And when you see him saying something about an ally, like Mubarak is no great shakes, you get the idea of why he was called that. Absolute brutal, heartless man, scheming, and who had many of his schemes come to fruition.
Right. And this continues. Washington should give Riyadh an ultimatum, he said. Either you, Saudis, prosecute or isolate those involved in the terror chain, including the Saudi intelligence services, and end all propaganda against Israel, or we invade your country, seize your oil fields, and occupy Mecca. This is a masterclass in diplomacy. I can't understand why there's international backlash against us or them. In closing his PowerPoint presentation, Morawiecki offered a grand strategy for the Middle East. Iraq is the tactical pivot, Saudi Arabia the strategic pivot, Egypt the prize. Leaked reports of Morawiecki's briefing did not indicate if anyone raised the question of how the Islamic world might respond to U.S. troops tramping around the grounds of the Great Mosque.
And recall that part of the reason that some of us saw 9/11 coming was simply because American troops were in Saudi Arabia. They weren't actually in Mecca, which of course is not allowed for non-Muslims to be in Mecca. Just imagine if, under the sway of the neocons, we actually put American troops in Mecca itself.
Well, and this is why we're doing this series first off, but this is why I find sort of like the pro-war, pro-imperial sort of revision in our spheres to be so damaging, because if that happened, I am certain we would not be hearing the end about how America is the new great crusader state that's liberating the Arabian Peninsula from Islam. Like this is this is one of a clear potential sort of mimetic trap that I could see many of our people falling into. That us on the panel would certainly not, but it's because we have priors that would prevent us from falling into this absolutely devastating trap that could happen. Could have. Remember, this article is speaking about the future. Nothing had come to pass yet along these lines.
It's amazing how easy it is to forget that.
Right. And speaking of, this continues. What these neoconservatives seek is to conscript American blood to make the world safe for Israel. They want the peace of the sword imposed on Islam and American soldiers to die if necessary to impose it. I'm going to take a brief aside here because this is something that I noticed when reading Woodrow Wilson's address to Congress, where the phrase "make the world safe for democracy" came from. I think this might be one of the most misinterpreted phrases in the world, because people see that Woodrow Wilson said that in 1917 and then see the Versailles Peace Treaty and everything that happened, where Woodrow Wilson famously was sort of shafted during the whole thing. He barely got what he wanted. And they determined that Wilson must have wanted an international world order led by America to make the world safe for democracy. But it's pretty clear in context of his speech, what he's talking about is that make the world safe for democracy means that America must defend herself, because otherwise the world is unsafe for democracy, meaning America. So I think that's a sort of pro-imperial revision of what Wilson actually said in his speech. It's a defensive statement rather than a pro-imperial statement when it was said,
thank
at
you.
least.
That's good to hear. I'm usually hard on Woodrow Wilson, so I appreciate your Sandbach-like defense there.
Well, it's regardless of the defense, you can't attack him on those grounds. So you can attack him on many others, though.
Appreciate it. Yeah, good.
So, and you have to remember, he was giving his war speech in response to what he called an attack. So it makes no sense to suddenly go on the offense. Anyways, Buchanan continues. Washington Times editor-at-large Arnaud de Bourgegrave, sorry, calls this the Bush-Sharon doctrine. Washington's Likudniks, he writes, have been in charge of U.S. policy in the Middle East since Bush was sworn into office. The neocons seek American empire, and Sharonites seek hegemony over the Middle East. The two agendas coincide precisely, and though neocons insist that it was September 11th that made the case for war on Iraq and militant Islam, the origin of their war plans go back far before. So this is, since we're kind of on the meta level on this stream, I think that what Buchanan is outlining here is a major reason why things like U.S. empire, U.S. imperialism, or whatever else should not be rehabilitated, made based, or whatnot else. These people, once again, are not gone. They will not be gone for a long time. No one listening to us, to my knowledge at least, has the power to just snap their fingers and get rid of these people who can still affect policy. If right now we started to rehabilitate American imperialism, in future streams we'll go into why that's probably a bad idea on its own. But if this happened now, you're just helping these people. You're helping this neoconservative lobby, what's left of it, conscript the United States to go fight Islam for not the United States.
Yep, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll continue. We're getting closer to the end. We're running over, but I think it's worth it this time around. Under the section Securing the Realm. The principal draftsman is Richard Pearl, an aide to Senator Scoop Jackson, who, in 1970, was overheard on a federal wiretap discussing classified information from the National Security Council with the Israeli embassy.
I have to say, I did not know this detail. I think he doesn't mean Jackson, he means Pearl was overheard discussing classified information with the Israeli embassy. Which is an amazing little salvo to toss in here in passing. That, I mean, that's generally would be considered traitorous activity, right?
God bless Richard Nixon for finding this out. I'm assuming that's who it is since it's 1970 and it's a wiretap involved. He continues, in Jews and American Politics, published in 1974, Stephen D. Isaacs wrote, Richard Pearl and Morris Amity command a tiny army of Semitophiles on Capitol Hill and direct Jewish power in behalf of Jewish interests. In 1983, the New York Times reported that Pearl had taken substantial payments from an Israeli weapons manufacturer. In 1996, with Douglas Feith and David Wormser, Pearl wrote A Clean Break, a new strategy for securing the realm for Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Okay, let me just break in real quick. Pay attention, folks. A Clean Break, 1996, very important document to know about. And I understand it says it was written for Netanyahu. My understanding is that it was Netanyahu was basically a co-author. He wasn't listed as a co-author, but he was a co-author. Anyway, this is quite important. Go ahead.
In it, Pearl, Feith, and Wormser urged Bibi to ditch the Oslo Accords of the assassinated Yitzhak Rabin and adopt a new aggressive strategy. Israel can shape its strategic environment in cooperation with Turkey and Jordan by weakening, containing, and even rolling back Syria. This effort can focus on removing Saddam Hussein from power in Iraq, an important Israeli strategic objective in its own right, as a means of foiling Syria's regional ambitions. Jordan has challenged Syria's regional ambitions recently by suggesting the restoration of the Hashemites in Iraq. In the Pearl-Feith-Wormser strategy, Israel's enemy remains Syria, but the road to Damascus runs through Baghdad. Their plan, which urged Israel to reestablish the principle of preemption, has now been imposed by Pearl, Feith, Wormser, and co. on the United States. In his own 1997 paper, A Strategy for Israel, Feith pressed Israel to reoccupy the areas under Palestinian Authority control, though the price in blood would be high. Whose blood, I'm sure the audience now knows.
Mm.
Wormser, as a resident scholar at AEI, drafted joint war plans for Israel and the United States to fatally strike the centers of radicalism in the Middle East. Israel and the United States should broaden the conflict to strike fatally, not merely disarm, the centers of radicalism in the region, the regimes of Damascus, Baghdad, Tripoli, Tehran, and Gaza. That would establish the recognition that fighting either the United States or Israel is suicidal.
And again, what a giveaway!
Or Israel.
When they, what a giveaway that they tag Gaza on here, right?
Yeah.
Because you maybe could because of some of the actions of Tripoli. That's Gaddafi, right?
Correct.
Yeah, and there was the famous Scottish flight that was blown up and that got tied back to him, right? So you could make a case for some of these others as being terrorist threats that are broader, but Gaza, we were never attacked by Gazans.
Gazans aren't even allowed to leave.
Yeah, exactly. So tagging Gaza on there, just to me, is just it jumps out. It's a big flashing red light. This is not an American interest. This is just Israel here.
Well, yeah, and I mean, look at this. They're talking about we'll use the United States to establish that fighting either the United States or Israel is suicidal. Like this is an equal partnership. These are both equally important. Right. Yeah. It's fascinating to me. The what's the word? Chutzpah? Is that the correct word I'm looking for?
Chutzpah, that's right.
So, and this continues. He urged both nations to be on the lookout for a crisis. This is a common theme in power, I'm sure, as any elite theorists in the audience might be familiar with. For as he wrote, crises can be opportunities. Wormser published his U.S.-Israeli war plan on January 1st, 2001, 9 months before 9/11.
Real quick, I would just mention that crises can be opportunities. Just got to mention my friend Robert Higgs' book, Crisis and Leviathan, a classic.
Right.
Yeah, where he taught he in that case is focusing on domestic policy and how things like the Great Depression became an opportunity to do a lot of things that they wanted to do anyway, right?
Yeah, right.
To grow the state, Go ahead.
Right. If our audience isn't familiar with Higgs's work, it's if you want to understand how, say, a managerial regime, the New Deal, Cold War measures, and whatever else fundamentally changed American society, you do have to understand that Robert Higgs was sort of early on the ratchet effect, if you will, on the state.
I think the ratchet effect is, in fact, referring to Robert Higgs.
Yeah, right,
yeah.
Right. So yeah. It's a core piece of literature for the audience. But I'll continue here with Buchanan's essay. About the Pearl Feith Wormser cabal, author Michael Lind writes, the radical Zionist right, to which Pearl and Feith belong, is small in number, but it has become a significant force in Republican policy-making circles. It is a recent phenomenon dating back to the late 70s and 80s, when many formerly Democratic Jewish intellectuals joined the broad Reagan coalition. While many of these hawks speak in public about global crusades for democracy, the chief concern of many such neoconservatives is the power and reputation of Israel. Right down the smokestack. Mm-hmm. Pearl today chairs the Defense Policy Board. Feith is an Undersecretary of Defense, and Wormser is Special Assistant to the Undersecretary of State for Arms Control, John Bolton. Fascinating. Who dutifully echoes the Pearl Sharon line.
Yeah, and this, Ryan, this gives me an opportunity to point something out. Earlier, he talked about, neocons. He was teasing them, right? Well, that's too light a word, but talking about how they're more likely to be, journalists and so forth, and not men who are accomplished as in a military way or in other ways. But as this roll call he just went through, they got themselves into positions of real power. They weren't just writing editorials, the neocons. They actually were running the U.S. empire. to a great degree. They were close to or literally in the positions that were able to call shots on these things. So don't underestimate. You shouldn't dismiss them as merely journalists or something, or eggheads. They got themselves into power and they used that power.
And they still wield power to this day. The fact that you have a Trump America First sort of nativist populist administration contemplating invading and bombing multiple countries around the world is that's not unrelated to what we're reading about today. So, according to the Israeli daily newspaper Haaretz, in late February, U.S. Undersecretary of State John Bolton said in meetings with Israeli officials that he has no doubt America will attack Iraq and that it will be necessary to deal with threats from Syria, Iran, and North Korea afterwards. I would just like to pause real quick. Once upon a time, in I believe the 1950s, the United States sort of completely reprimanded and I would say harmed its allies for colluding with Israel to invade parts of the Middle East. And here we are reading this. It's fascinating. The U.S. Undersecretary of State John Bolton is colluding with Israeli officials about where to strike, attack, and whatnot else. And just to finish out this section, on January 26, 1998, President Clinton received a letter imploring him to use his State of the Union address to make removal of Saddam Hussein's regime the aim of American foreign policy, and to use military action because diplomacy is failing. Were Clinton to do that, the signers pledged, they would offer our full support in this difficult but necessary endeavor. Signing the pledge were Elliott Abrams, Bill Bennett, John Bolton, Robert Kagan, William Kristol, Richard Pearl, and Paul Wolfowitz. 4 years before 9/11, the neocons had Baghdad on their minds.
And again, he's just establishing that, why was Iraq attacked? That had nothing to do with 9/11. As we now know, the whole weapons of mass destruction thing was just lies. It's because they had wanted to do that for years. And 9/11 became an excuse to do something that they'd already planned well before this.
I see a lot of justifications for invading Iraq here, but so far I don't think I've read the words weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah. I don't know why he doesn't mention that in this article. Mr. Quinn, any thoughts on that?
He probably didn't want to dignify it with a response.
Yeah, that's why. Yeah. It was so ridiculous. Anyway, go ahead, sir.
Okay, so under the section titled The Wolfowitz Doctrine. In 1992, a startling document was leaked from the office of Paul Wolfowitz at the Pentagon. Barton Gellman of the Washington Post called it a classified blueprint intended to help set the nation's direction for the next century. The Wolfowitz memo called for a permanent U.S. military presence on 6 continents to deter all potential competitors from even aspiring to a larger regional or global role. Containment, the victorious strategy of the Cold War, was to give way to an ambitious new strategy designed to establish and protect a new order.
Yeah, so and I had learned this under the name full spectrum dominance.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm making the right connection here, but this idea that if you think about like Mearsheimer and great power, a great power way of looking at things, rather than acknowledging that there's other powers on the globe, and China might have an interest in things that are near China, Russia might have an interest in the things near Russia, and so forth. Instead, there is one great power, the monopolar world, right? There is one great power, and it's the United States, and it cannot allow any rivals anywhere, not just in the Monroe Doctrine area, but anywhere on the globe. No one can be a rival to the power and might of the U.S. It's quite a sweeping and one might say even insane vision.
and I find this. Yeah, right. And I find this interesting because there's people in our sphere that maybe hear sort of the vital or bellicose undertones and think this is base. Yeah, the world should be dominated by America and Americans. But like I am struggling to think of a top of the food chain empire in history that benefited from being the global superpower. is there a single one that did not end in demographic liquidation of the core population of the empire or leave the treasury intact? Is there a single one?
The Persians, right?
Well, yes and no. The
Okay.
Achaemenids are not the Sassanids, are not the Parthians. So
Right. Gotcha.
no.
So, yeah, I don't like this is great for a different place that's not the United States. If the United States is the sole power in the world that gets to dictate and occupy anywhere it wants to and fund them for and ad infinitum. But I really do not understand the positive case from the American perspective. The United States should be the sole world superpower. We have this is not like this isn't the 90s really either that we compare this to. This policy is trying to ensure we stay that way, not that it just happens to be this way.
Right.
Has this brought us good things in the 2000s, the 2010s, the modern day? Is this working? Is this good for us?
Not for Americans, but Americans are evidently not the point, as Buchanan's explaining here. Go ahead,
Right.
Ryan.
Okay. Though the Wolfowitz memo was denounced and dismissed in 1992, it became American policy in the 33-page National Security Strategy, NSS, issued by President Bush on September 21st, 2002. Washington Post reporter Tim Reich describes it as a watershed in U.S. foreign policy that reverses the fundamental principles that have guided successive presidents for more than 50 years: containment and deterrence. I guess this is fascinating. If you lived through this time, you got to see the United States foreign policy go from the aggressive contain and deter to the somehow more aggressive we will be the sole superpower. This is fascinating.
Yeah, and in particular, I think it's already been mentioned, the principle of preemption, but the whole notion of preemptive attacks started to get sold at this point, which, historically, the U.S. had always been careful to maneuver the other guy into seeming to attack first.
Right.
For example, with World War II, by keeping secret was what FDR was doing to Japan, so it looked like Japan was just attacking Pearl Harbor for no reason at all. That sort of thing, right? Well, now that facade is being dropped. The U.S. will just attack you because it views you as a potential rival on some level, and so we'll just attack you. Right? You didn't do anything to us.
And continuing, Andrew Basovich, a professor at Boston University, writes of the NSS that he marvels at its fusion of breathtaking utopianism with barely disguised mock politic. It reads as if it were the product not of sober, ostensibly conservative Republicans, but of an unlikely collaboration between Woodrow Wilson and the elder Field Marshal von Moltke. In confronting America's adversaries, the paper declares, "We will not hesitate to act alone if necessary, to exercise our right of self-defense by acting preemptively." It warns any nation that seeks to acquire power to rival the United States that it will be courting war with the United States. And it continues, "The president has no intention of allowing any nation to catch up with the huge lead the United States has opened since the fall of the Soviet Union more than a decade ago. Our forces will be strong enough to dissuade potential adversaries from pursuing a military buildup in hopes of surpassing or equaling the power of the United States. America must reconcile herself to an era of nation building on a grand scale and with no exit strategy." Robert Kagan instructs that this Pax Americana the neocons envision bids fair to usher us into a time of what Harry Elmer Barnes called permanent war for permanent peace.
Yeah, so Ryan, you called it just before this, right? You said with the fall of the Soviet Union, the 90s, post 1991, became this monopolar moment, right, where there had been the great conflict between the Soviet Union and the United States, and then the Soviet Union went away, and suddenly the United States sort of stood alone on the world stage, and the doctrine here is to try to maintain that bit of happy luck or whatever forever, and do whatever it took throughout the world to maintain that moment. I've seen some great commentators say, you know, how much will we sacrifice to try to maintain this monopolar moment that maybe sort of made sense by accident or whatever for about a decade after 1991. But now in a world of China and Russia rising to some degree because we help China, for example, rise, this just it becomes increasingly a mad project. And yet there does seem to be a lot of things that are still geared toward this policy that Bush announced in 2002. That we're going to do whatever it takes to maintain 1992 forever. It's kind of insane.
I mean, could you imagine the fatal wound to the United States that would be Russia taking up our responsibilities in Europe and China taking up our responsibilities in Africa? Like, can you imagine how fatally wounded the American people would be if that were to happen? Like, I can hardly countenance the wound. So, and this is getting close to the end here. As President Bush was warned on September 20th, 2001, that he will be indicted for a decisive surrender in the war on terror should he fail to attack Iraq, he is also on notice that pressure on Israel is forbidden. For as the neoconservatives have played the anti-Semitic card, they will not hesitate to play the Munich card as well. A year ago, when Bush called on Sharon to pull out of the West Bank, Sharon fired back that he would not let anyone do to Israel what Neville Chamberlain had done to the Czechs. Frank Gaffney of the Center for Security Policy immediately backed up Ariel Sharon. With each passing day, Washington appears to view its principal Middle Eastern allies' conduct as inconvenient, in much the same way London and Paris came to see Czechoslovakia's resistance to Hitler's offers of peace in exchange for Czech lands.
Yeah, and in case people don't know, for neoconservatives, it's always 1939, and if you don't do what they want, you're always Neville Chamberlain appeasing, the evil dictator Manuel Noriega in Panama or whoever it is that day, right? It's just absurd.
Yes, I mean, it all has to be shoehorned into the World War II morality play.
I mean, this is convincing to me. I don't know about you guys. Like, if we just keep giving Israel slightly more borderland, they'll eventually stop. The argument is sound. So, to continue, when former U.S. NATO Commander General George Jalin said the United States may have to impose a peace on Israel and the Palestinians, he too faced the charge of appeasement. Wrote Gaffney, they would, presumably, go beyond Britain and France's sellout of an ally at Munich in 1938. The Impose a Peace School is apparently prepared to have us play the role of Hitler's Wehrmacht as well, seizing and turning over to Yasser Arafat the contemporary Sudetenland, the West Bank and Gaza Strip, and perhaps part of Jerusalem as well. This is fascinating to me. Podhoretz agreed Sharon was right in the substance of what he said, but called it politically unwise to use the Munich analogy. President Bush is on notice. Should he pressure Israel to trade land for peace, the Oslo formula in which his father and Yitzhak Rabin believed, he will, as was his father, be denounced as an anti-Semite and a Munich-style appeaser by both Israelis and their neoconservative allies inside his own big tent. Yet if Bush cannot deliver Sharon, there can be no peace. And if there is no peace in the Mideast, there is no security for us ever, for there will be no end to terror. As most every diplomat and journalist who travels to the region will relate, America's failure to be even-handed America's failure to be even-handed, our failure to rein in Sharon, our failure to condemn Israel's excesses, and our moral complicity in Israel's looting of Palestinian lands and denial of their right to self-determination sustains the anti-Americanism in the Islamic world in which terrorists and terrorism breed.
Yeah, and I'll just comment the tragedy of U.S. Arab relations, for example. My understanding is that after World War II, the U.S. was very popular in the Middle East among Arabs, for example, and could have kept that popularity quite easily not even necessarily, you know, by, doing everything they wanted, right? But just sort of standing above and being sort of even-handed. I think the U.S. could have kept respect. Well, that respect that Arabs once had for the U.S. is long, long gone, dead, buried, and shot in the head.
Right. So, and this is the conclusion here. Let us conclude. The Israeli people are America's friends and have a right to peace and secure borders. We should help them secure these rights. As a nation, we have made a moral commitment, endorsed by half a dozen presidents, which Americans wish to honor, not to permit these people who have suffered much to see their country overrun and delayed or destroyed. And we must honor this commitment. So this is interesting because this is where we've clearly broken with Buchanan. Perhaps it made somewhat more sense for him to say this at the time. Perhaps he was cowed into saying this, but it seems clear that this is not sustainable. In fact, I think that Buchanan has made the case throughout this whole article that this isn't sustainable and concludes at this point. But either way, he continues. But U.S. and Israeli interests are not identical. They often collide, and when they do, U.S. interests must prevail. Moreover, we do not view the Sharon regime as America's best friend. Since the time of Ben Gurion, the behavior of the Israeli regime has been Jekyll and Hyde. In the 1950s, its intelligence service, the Mossad, had agents in Egypt blow up U.S. installations to make it appear the work of Cairo, to destroy U.S. relations with the new Nasser government. During the Six-Day War, Israel ordered repeated attacks on the undefended USS Liberty that killed 34 American sailors and wounded 171 and included the machine gunning of life rafts. This massacre was neither investigated nor punished by the U.S. government in an act of national cravenness. Though we have given Israel $20,000 for every Jewish citizen, Israel refuses to stop building the settlements that are the cause of the Palestinian Intifada. Likud has dragged our good name through the mud and blood of Ramallah, ignored Bush's requests to restrain itself, and sold U.S. weapons technology to China, including the Patriot, the Phoenix air-to-air missile, and the Lavi fighter, which is based on F-16 technology. Only direct U.S. intervention blocked Israel's sale of our AWACS system. Israel suborned Jonathan Pollard to loot our secrets and refuses to return the documents, which would establish whether or not they were sold to Moscow. When Clinton tried to broker an agreement at Y Plantation between Israel and Arafat, Bibi Netanyahu attempted to extort, as his price for signing, release of Pollard so he could take this treasonous snake back to Israel as a national hero.
Since done by President Trump, by the way. Go ahead.
Do the Brits, our closest allies, behave like this? I mean, that's a powerful line in and of itself. And then finally, though we have said repeatedly that we admire much of what this president has done, he will not deserve re-election if he does not jettison the neoconservatives' agenda of endless war on the Islamic world that serve only the interests of a country rather than the one he was elected to preserve and protect.
Man, what a great article. What a great article. And that last litany of the ways that Israel has directly attacked Americans, stolen technology, used the Jewish American Jonathan Pollard to steal nuclear secrets, if I remember correctly. I did not know the first thing he mentioned. That was a new one to me. Mossad blowing up U.S. installations as a false flag operation to make it seem like that's what the Nasser government was doing. So that's one I'll need to look up and dig into. I knew the rest, but I didn't know that one. But what a litany at the end that he ends with, underscoring, in my view. Yeah, it's interesting what you said, Ryan. He gives what to our ears these days seems like he grants Israel too much, right? But then he goes into this long list of what they've done to us, and he names some of the things that have become memes. Google USS Liberty and all this sort of stuff, right? Well, here's Pat Buchanan putting it right at at the rousing conclusion of his article 20 years ago, you know.
Yeah, right. And this is something else that I would like to point out as well. He mentions like the actual allies to the U.S., at least in action throughout the last century, I guess it would be, the Brits. You know, also people like the Australians, others that have joined us whenever we decide to embark upon these foolish interventions that harm us. They go along with us, either out of a sense of duty or because they too are forced to, or whatnot else. I've one of the things that really early on set me against like the greatest ally shtick was just because the basic history didn't seem to bear that out. So, with that, my voice is tired. We've ran over quite a significant bit. As you can see on the screen there, we get to finish with the ghoulish smile of Dick Cheney. the refutation in action of everything that we just read, perhaps. So,
well, let's see. I do need to go, but we have a few super chats. Who should maybe?
Yeah,
how about I read them? I read them because you're tired, right?
Yeah, but if you can do the ads first, and also if you two have any closing remarks, do that before the super chats and the ads.
Before the super chats, okay. Well, I wanted to share the series I did on my channel, which I'm going to put in the chat. This is a series I did this year called the Specialist Relationship, Specialer, Specialist, and it's about the relationship between the U.S. and Israel. And the one that particularly got attention, in fact, I went on Pete Quinones to reiterate some of the information I shared in this series, was about what I've called the Israeli panopticon. And that is that the Israelis try various surveillance and control techniques in Gaza. And then they sell and train these techniques to our own governments to use on us. And if you follow my Twitter account on a pretty regular basis now, I simply share the thumbnail from that stream, the Israeli Panopticon. I quote tweet yet another revelation of connections between, you know, Israeli intelligence and the New York police and all this stuff that's coming out. It's just amazing. And I just put Israeli Panopticon, so you can just see the theme as we continue to learn more about how their tactics are exported to us. So anyway, recommend that to you.
Mr. Quinn, any summarizing remarks, thoughts, or anything else?
A special attachment to any one particular nation is a seed of ruin.
Yeah, we'll be discussing that in a few weeks. Yeah, this is going to be a very nice series on American spirits, talking about a sort of history of the philosophies behind U.S. foreign policy and which sides say what and where they disagree. So we've gotten the neoconservatives this week. Last week we got to hear the old libertarian streak in the old right against FDR. And then next week, I believe we'll be going over the Monroe Doctrine and how it has been revised over time. So that's just what I can share now. Mr. Carson, if you could finish the stream off real quick.
These means read the super chats, Stephen.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I had to find the mute button again. Okay, here we go. I think I've got them all. All right, Bolero393, $10. Thank you very much. Neocons love this country because it is powerful and can be financialized and protect Israel. Buchanan and the rest of us love this country because it is ours. Policy preferences are derived accordingly.
That's very correct, Bolero. Thank you very much for the super chat. And answer my DM.
Call them out. Another one from Bolero393, another $10. Thank you. It's always a cakewalk if you can get the Appalachian boys to fight and die for the people and land you actually care about. This that was supposedly promised to you 3 millennia ago. Quite right. And then one last one from Bolero393. On 9/11, foreigners on expired visas lashed out at America. If Bush had cracked down on immigration, legal and illegal, we'd have the 1980 Electoral College map today. The GOP want to lose. A great note to end on.
Here we have some more. I'll take it from there though, because
Okay, go ahead.
I've had some time to rest since then.
I'm not seeing
So
them.
Christopher Burks for $2 gives us a salute. Thank you very much, sir. We appreciate it. Don Browning for 20. I guess that's Australian dollars, is what a $sign means. Super sticker, and it's described to me as an anthropomorphic kitty dressed as a samurai waving a flag with number 1. Thank you very much. The moral support is greatly appreciated. Melon,
Even
for
from
15.
weebs.
Yes. Unfortunate samurai aesthetics. Melon for $15 says it's anti-Italian discrimination. That's what it is. It's our holiday, and they want to take it away. Yeah, sorry, I didn't recognize the quote there. Otherwise, I wouldn't have emphasized the Italian as hard. But thank you very much. Polly B for $3 says, public intellectuals could be here, he thought. I hate public intellectuals. They are some of the worst. Some of them used to be really good. It's perhaps an indicator of a civilizational decline. We also, if you check our description, we also have affiliated people that affiliate with us that want to sell you things of quality. Fox and Sons Coffee, which I can vouch for as being a particularly quality product. You should definitely try. We have an Alp link in the description. There's an Axios Fitness code that you can use as well. And then Tallman Books for one of our good friends of the club. You should check all of those out, especially the last one for any people that are addicted to purchasing books. With that out of the way.
Also linked in the description is a link to Radlib's playlist of the series he referenced earlier.
Yes, right, yeah. So with all of that, next week, like I said, we'll be going over the Monroe Doctrine and the original deliverance of it. We'll be discussing how James K. Polk reinterpreted it, the response to James K. Polk by Monroe's Secretary of War, John C. Calhoun, defending the original interpretation. And then we'll be talking about a further extension of it under the first Roosevelt administration. So, yes, this is kicking off a long philosophy of American foreign policy. It's very important, I think, as everyone is seeing. If you get this wrong, you end up with the people we were talking about in the article today. With that, I think that's everything out of the way. Thank you, Mr. Quinn and Mr. Carson, for joining me.
Thank you.
And yeah, and I think that's it. We'll see you all next